Okay, in this video, we're going to be looking at rewriting what are called linear equations. So we are just getting ready to get into graphing. We've been solving equations here for a while. So before we take our next step into graphing, we've got to figure out how to rewrite an equation so that we can graph it the easiest way possible. So first of all, some of you may know what the word linear means, some of you may not. So the first thing we're going to do is define that word. The word linear just means that it forms a straight line when it's graphed. Okay, and if you take the word linear, you can see the part of the word right here says line. So if it's a straight line, it's linear. If it's not linear. So if you look at these two graphs right here, the one on the left makes a completely straight line, so it would be linear. The one on the right is curved all around. It would not be linear. Also, if a graph bends, so let's say it makes like an L shape, that would not be linear. Even though the two parts of the L are straight, the fact that it bends right in the middle would make it not linear. So like I said, we're going to be looking at how to take an equation and rewrite it so that it will be easier for us to graph. So we're going to look at some steps. And go ahead and make sure you write these down. Steps to rewrite an equation, a linear equation. Our goal for this entire process is we want to solve the equation for y. Our goal is to get the y all by itself. We want it to say y equals, and then you'll have the rest of the equation. You will have an x thrown in there somewhere, and then you'll probably have some regular numbers. Okay, but our whole goal is to get it so that it says y equals and then something else. And we'll get into what all of this means when we get closer to graphing. So step number one is you're going to move the x and whatever's with the x. So if it's just an x, you'll move it. If it says 5x, you'll move the 5x to the other side of the equal sign. And we've been doing that with solving equations. We'll go through some examples here in just a minute. First thing is you want to get that x away from the y, so it's going to get moved completely to the other side of the equal sign. And then step number two, the last thing you're going to do is you're going to get rid of the number that's right with the y. Now if your y is already by itself, you're not going to need to do this step. But most of the time you'll have a number right in front of it. For instance, it'll say 5y. You have to get rid of that 5 so that the y is all by itself. So we've talked about these steps. We're just going to jump in and do some examples. That way, hopefully you can get a little more comfortable with it. So the first one we're going to do is this equation, x plus y equals 5. So I told you just a minute or so ago that we want to get the y all by itself. We want this equation to say just y equals and then the rest of it. So I told you there would be an x in there somewhere. So as we go to solve this for y, go ahead and draw my line through here. My first step was to move the x to the other side of the equal sign. So notice this x, first thing you want to figure out is if it's positive or negative. So first of all, this is a positive x. So to get rid of it, I'm going to subtract x on each side. So notice your x's cancel, and I'm left with y equals. Now, a couple different ways you could write this. You could just write this as 5 minus x, but the way I'm going to write it and the way you're going to see it all the time is they will always list the x first. And that'll make more sense whenever we get to graphing, but I'm going to put the x first. Now this x, notice, is negative, so negative x. And then we got to figure out, will it be plus 5 or minus 5? And all you need to do is look at the number. Is that a positive 5 or is it a negative 5? Well, it's a positive 5, so I'm going to write plus 5. Now, my second step would be to get rid of the number that is with the y. Now in this one, there is no number with the y. So this is what we're looking for. It just says y equals, and then there's the rest of it. You'll always have an x in there. Usually always have another number in there in the ones that we're doing today. So my answer is y equals negative x plus 5. Okay, now on to the next one. We have 6x plus 5y equals negative 15. Go ahead and put that line there. And I'll just follow the only two steps that I have. First step is to move the x to the other side. Well, in this one, I have 6x. That's what I want to get rid of. So it is a positive 6x, so to get rid of it, I'm going to subtract 6x. And I need to do that from both sides. So those cancel, and I'm left with a positive 5y, so I just write 5y equals, and then again, remember, I always put what's with the x first. So we have a negative 6x, and then since this 15 is a negative 15, I'm just going to write minus 15. Keep in mind, a minus sign and a negative sign are the exact same thing. Okay, I still don't have my y all by itself yet, so my second step is to get rid of the number that's with the y. So I need to get rid of this 5. So right now it says 5 times y equals all of this. So to get rid of it, I'm going to divide by 5. Now here's where you need to be careful. Whenever I divide by 5 over here, I'm actually going to divide both of these by 5, the negative 6x by 5 and this negative 15 by 5. You can't just do one or the other, you have to do it to both. Okay, so those cancel, left with y equals. Okay, when I go to simplify over here, notice you have negative 6 over 5, it's an improper fraction. I'm going to leave that as an improper fraction, and I want you to leave it as an improper fraction too. If I could put it in simplest form, I would do that, but you can't simplify this fraction. Over here, I have my minus sign, and then 15 divided by 5 I know is 3, so I'm going to leave that as 3 and make it simpler. Now the reason you want this number in front of the x to be a fraction, we'll talk about that when we get closer to graphing. It will make graphing a whole lot easier if you have a fraction here in front of the x instead of a decimal. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So y equals negative 6/5 x minus 3. Okay, next example. We have 4x minus 2y equals 16. Draw my line here. Okay, again, just follow our two steps. The first one is to move the x to the other side. So I need to get rid of this 4x. Well, it's a positive 4x, so I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. Those cancel. Now be careful here because this is actually a negative 2y that you are left with. Okay, and then I'm going to put my x first, so negative 4x, and then that's a positive 16, so I will just write plus 16. Okay, then got to get rid of this negative 2, so this says negative 2 times y, so I'm going to divide by a negative 2. Don't forget the negative. Remember, you have to do it to both parts over here. So I'm left with y. Now these I know I can simplify. So negative 4 divided by negative 2 is a positive 2, and then the x stays with it. Two negatives would make a positive. And then this is a positive 16 divided by a -2 would give me a -8. So I'm just going to write -8. And then there's my answer. Y equals 2x minus 8. Okay, and then we're going to go through one last example here. Number 4, you have 9x minus 5y equals 3. Okay, so again, I want this y by itself, so I'm going to get rid of this 9x first. And again, it's positive, so I'm going to subtract 9x from both sides. 9x minus 9x is 0, so that cancels. And I'm left with a negative 5y equals, and then again, I'll put what's with the x first. So negative 9x, and then that's a positive 3, so I'm going to write plus 3. And then last step is to get rid of what's with the y. So I'm going to get rid of this negative 5. Now, since it says negative 5 times y, I'm going to divide by negative 5. And do that to both pieces over here. So your negative 5's cancel. I'm only left with y equals. Okay, right here, 9/5 is an improper fraction. It won't divide evenly, and I can't simplify it. So I'm just going to leave it as this improper fraction. But I do know that 2 negatives would actually make it a positive 9/5. So 9/5 x. Okay, and over here, I have a fraction, 3 over negative 5. Can't be simplified. But I do know that positive and a negative would make it a negative 3/5. So I'm just going to write minus 3/5. You could leave it as plus negative 3/5 and it would be the same thing. But you can just put a minus sign there if you want. So y equals 9/5 x minus 3/5. And there's your answer. So keep in mind on all of these that we solved, our goal was to get the equation so that it said y equals something else. You'll always have an x over here for today. And then notice that whenever I get my final answer, notice that I never combined the two numbers. Because remember, in order to combine them, they both have to have the same variable. So in this case, this one had an x, this one did not, so I couldn't combine them together. You have to leave them separate.